Well, welcome everybody to the love episode of Open World Chat, where we're
Oh,
going to look at romance and sci-fi, maybe some horror. Just take a look at where it fits in the whole genre and probably talk a few interesting examples. I'm John Odom. I'm here with Mark Card as usual. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How about everybody else out there? Hope y'all are doing okay too.
I'm listening. I'm not hearing them answer. Trying.
What? You're not hearing an answer?
No, I must not be doing well enough to respond. Oh well. So Mark, you wanted to talk about this subject. So I'm going to let you kick it off. What's the inspiration here?
Well, the inspiration is, and I'll just put it the way I saw in a French film, and I can't really remember what film it was, but it's a character reading a book, and somebody asked him what's he reading, and he said, "Well, I'm reading a love story," and the other character says, "Well, really, aren't all books about love? I mean, cookbooks, everything is about love. It's human society, so everything has kind of a strong love element to it. But nobody would expect science fiction or horror to have much of a romantic element to it. And I just thought we need to explore that side of what's going on here.
So I'm I'm sure you got a million things on you got to talk about here that you want in terms of covering this topic. But I gotta say, you said sci-fi, you said romance. I thought, a few obvious examples came into my head. And then I thought a little more farther back in time, started going back, started looking, 60s, 50s, 40s, and one couple came to mind for me. Boom, there they were. You want to guess?
Go ahead.
Flash Gordon and Dale Arden.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. Of course, of course.
Almost archetype of that sort of beloved couple where she's always needing to be rescued, but is maybe just independent enough to not look like a total fool. But at the end of the day, it's all about Flash saving the day and swooping her off and swinging away from strange, disturbingly racist Asian style stereotypical bad guys. But and that is the model that you see later and later, or for years afterwards, including the one that starts getting pushed back on just a little bit in some of the 50s era stuff, including the 50s brief Flash Gordon TV series, where Dale is projected as a little bit more competent and a little less pathetic. And
Well,
you
she'd have
start,
to be. I
yeah,
mean, she'd have to be post-war. You know what I'm saying? Because women enter the workforce, and a whole lot of women don't exit the workforce at the end of the war. And so, like I've always said, it's just a reflection of human society, science fiction, and you begin to get more and more independent females all the way through,
mhm.
all the way up to Barbarella
Yeah,
in the
yeah, I was thinking
60s.
about Barbarella. It's funny how that pushback starts. So you start seeing some of that pushback as early as the 50s, which in general, no, but every now and then you'd get a movie that would just a little bit,
Hmm.
something like Them, where we
Yeah,
meet our female protagonist who's actually a scientific professional.
sure.
And they're like, female scientists, never heard of that before. I mean, then it's no time before she reverts to form. And it's partly because I think in the 50s, science fiction just wasn't interested in romance.
Right, right. More about aliens than romance.
More, and still the damsels in distress, but
Right.
that's not necessarily romance. That's like a shorthand for romance.
Yeah, it's an archetype for romance. But I think we can go back even further if you look at books. There was a very strong element of at least desired romance from one of what lots of people call the first science fiction novel, Frankenstein.
Which we could have a whole episode about
Oh,
on.
definitely. But he wants a mate.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, that element of romance, or at least desired romance or human connection to someone else, is pretty heavily there's a pretty heavy current running through the whole novel.
Hmm.
So it's there. It's definitely there. and it's kind of an integral part of the genre that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think of. Um, and there's some early film references to it. There's Metropolis
Hmm.
and Maria. There's a strong element of romantic connection between the robot and the main human character.
Right.
So it's definitely a very important element of science fiction.
I know we've got a lot of years to cover, and I want to give a special tip of the hat, though, to just doing something different to the birds. The birds was interesting because the birds starts out, and this was the intent as a sort of screwball comedy in the classic sense, with
Right.
the man and the woman, they're not a good fit, and she's the flighty socialite and he's down to earth and isn't taking her seriously, and they're setting up this screwball comedy before suddenly the movie turns on a dime and becomes horror. That's number one. That's a hard trick to pull off. You don't see that very often, because it fails. It fails miserably. I mean, suddenly you're in a horror movie. Um, but using that romance to lead the story in and to first make the movie about the romance before you take off into, in this case, horror, I thought was brilliant. And I think that's, to this day, that stands as a unique example of genre bending in that sense.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I think Hitchcock takes a cue from himself there because of the way he does Psycho. Psycho starts out as a crime thriller and ends up being a movie about a serial killer.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I think The Birds is even more of a crazy
oh no,
deal.
I think it is
Yeah.
too. I think he hints at genre bending with Psycho and then really kind of magnifies it out as when he gets to the birds. But that's a really good example of it. It's a turns on a dime, but starts out as kind of a romantic film. It's
Hmm.
interesting. I
Yeah.
like it. I like it.
So take us a little farther up. Give us some examples that maybe start moving us out of the 50s, and because you get into the 60s, especially, it's such a transitional period for all these genre movies. And you start seeing the appearance of sci-fi on television a lot more. And television, gives you a lot more opportunity to develop more themes. Where if the 50s were sort of shoving romance to the back corner a little bit, needs a little more plot than just the giant monster of the week. It does bring you crashing down right into Star Trek.
Oh, of course. Yes, obviously. I should have been able to figure that out from your clues, but I didn't.
Because we have romance in Star Trek. I mean, it's mainly known for Kirk and the alien chick of the week, but there are a
Yes.
couple moments where it actually goes for a genuine romance. And the two, in my opinion, are as night and day as they can be. And that's with Edith Keeler and Sitting on the Edge of Forever,
Yeah,
and then Reyna in Requiem for Methuselah, which
sure.
is one of those bad third season episodes. And one is a much more sophisticated romance story, and the other is just retro sort of male fantasy schlock.
Well, something else occurs to me when you talk about Star Trek and romance, and that is the unrequited romance with Nurse Chapel and Spock.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
romance has this kind of, it's not necessarily just couples who are madly in love with each other. It's it's like it is in real life, or sometimes you've got one person interested and the other person isn't, and you deal with the tension between the characters because of that. Either the second party recognizes that desire and rejects it, or they just ignore it and are oblivious. Either way, the person with the unrequited love ends up, tortured.
Well, obviously, you're not the only one who caught that as a particularly interesting plot line to mine, since we're mining it so heavily now in Strange New Worlds.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, definitely. And it's just hinted at a little bit here and there, especially in the original series episode Amok Time,
Yeah.
where poor Christine Chapel brings him a bowl of pomeek soup and he throws it at her.
Yep.
So it's definitely there, the 60s. Star Trek is a great example of it. And, there's pushback later on about that kind of romantic love between a captain and an alien, or between a captain and a certain yeoman. Um, or at least the implied desire between Captain Kirk and Yeoman Rand.
And
That's
it plays around with it in some other ways, trying to, with like so much Star Trek, it sort of tried to be progressive, but it tended to be regressive when it came to anything involving women. But I do think of the Metamorphosis episode too, where there's this glowing, one of the old Trek glowing energy beings that for whatever reason identifies as female, falling for Zephram Cochrane, and they find a way to be together in the end. And there's a nice little story there they were trying to tell about how love can transcend, boundaries, that we may think. I mean, you could read into that a metaphor was on the edge of being a very progressive episode.
uh, level of progressive romance, but it didn't quite make it there.
Didn't quite make it. They still at the end of the day had to basically make this energy being a she
Yeah,
to
yeah.
make it work for them. But you know,
Well, and then, you've got the whole salt vampire in love with McCoy.
oh, who was Salt Vampire ever really in love with McCoy though, or he
Well,
was just a means to an end?
yeah, that's true, but still, the implication is there, I think.
Hmm. Well, look at this. We're stuck in Star Trek, which
Yep,
is a little, we got to watch that because we got some Star Trek to seriously cover later on.
yep, we sure do.
Um, when we get to start talking about Discovery. But in the meantime, we're moving rapidly into something closer to the modern age. Listen, how old we are, the modern age of movies. So when you had this in mind, when you wanted to talk about this topic, what movies or TV or novels were you thinking of? What clicked and was like, this is the first one on my list?
Yeah, again, I didn't do it really kind of chronologically. So,
No, I don't
uh,
mean chronologically. I mean, okay, when you think of a romantic sci-fi movie, sci-fi book, sci-fi TV show, word association, for you, which one comes to mind?
yeah, this is out of left field, but it's Wally.
Oh, that is out of left field. Here I was expecting something like Her or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind or something.
Wally.
Okay, all right, let's hear it. Give me more.
Wally is one of my favorite movies of all time. Uh, Disney Pixar movie. It's the tale of a unassuming, nebbishy little trash robot on Earth that was, to borrow a phrase from Firefly. And basically, all it does all day long is collect trash and squeeze it into little cubes and deposit it in the appropriate place. And then it gets thunderstruck, what the French would call a coup de foudre. It gets a visit from a spacecraft that comes down, and you have this beautiful streamlined 25th century robot come down, and Wally is instantly in love with her. And it finds a plant specimen on Earth after centuries of nothing but garbage, and it shuts down. And it's shutting down because it's radioed back to its mothership, which has all the population of Earth on it, and it's waiting for that mothership to arrive so humans can fix the Earth again now that it can grow plant life.
Mhm.
And it's just a good metaphor for love, even though it's robot love. You're hit out of the blue with the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, and then it shuts down, and you have to stand guard over it until it comes back to life.
Mhm.
And Wally patiently uh, deals with the worst circumstances he possibly can when he waits for Eva to reawaken and take him off to this paradise where they can work together to restore Earth for the humans.
Hmm.
So it's a beautiful little movie. It is definitely romantic.
Oh,
And
yeah. The romance is the central storyline, really. I mean, the
that's
rest
exactly right.
that we
The
think of.
romance between Eva and Wally is the definite point of the movie. So I love it. It's a great example of clear science fiction, which is based on a romantic notion. That's my first one right there. It's Wally.
Oh, all right. I yeah, I wouldn't have thought that. You got me. You got me good. I did mention I don't think you can talk about this topic without talking about a couple of the movies that I mentioned there, Her and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. You you watch these? Have you seen those movies?
I've seen Her, but not Eternal Spotlight.
Oh, you need to treat yourself to Eternal Spotlight or Eternal, yeah, Sunshine of the
Yeah,
Spot.
Eternal Sunshine. Yes.
No, Eternal Sunshine of the, yeah, okay. Um, anyways, yeah, treat yourself to that. That is an excellent movie. And that's also a good example of sci-fi stepping outside itself a little bit, because sci-fi can be such an insular, something written for those of us who are fans. We tend to live in a little bit of a sci-fi bubble. And I think Wall-E's a good example of, stepping outside of that and bringing in
Yeah.
larger audiences. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind does that in a different way. As that it goes after, well, and a lot of things, but one of the things it does, other than just tell a good story, is, in my opinion, really deconstruct the trope of the manic pixie dream girl,
Oh, wow.
which is great to see. Clementine, Kate Winslet's character, is a classic manic pixie dream girl, until you get to know her, and
Right.
that that character starts to develop more. But then you have this key point in the story where she, um, speaking to Joel, Jim Carrey's character, and she says very explicitly, "I am not your fantasy girl. I am not some something you can just spill your hopes and dreams into. I am not here to make your life better or to fulfill your fantasies. I'm just a screwed up girl."
Right. Right.
And
Well,
I mean, that tells you that that was really an intent there in that Kaufman script to do that. And as such, it added to the greater narrative of what romance is in movies and some of these tropes and breaking them down outside of sci-fi. And I think it's a great contribution to cinema in that way. Of course, some might not argue that it's even sci-fi, but it clearly does depend on, the whole story is based on this speculative technology of being able to make you forget someone. Um,
right. Right. Yeah. The idea that you can selectively eliminate memory.
Yeah. Well, here's your homework till next time is you got to watch that movie.
Okay.
Wait movie.
Yeah, Her to me falls into the category of unrequited love. I mean, for a while she reciprocates, but then she realizes, oh, I could do a lot better than this guy.
And she gets like 100 guys or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah, but aren't they finally, I mean, they're finally split up by circumstance, not necessarily the lack of feeling for each other, lack of mutual feeling. It just she changes too much and it becomes untenable, becomes an unworkable romance.
Yeah, that's true. But and that makes it, quite realistic. That's a lot of that's the way a lot of relationships end up.
That's true. That's true. Not quite.
Well, speaking of Her and artificial life forms, I want to take this back not to the movie Blade Runner, which I think definitely has a heavy element of romance. I mean, that's the whole reason why he runs away at the end. But the short story that it's based on,
Which I've
Do,
never read,
and,
actually.
Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Hmm.
Well, what you don't know about the short story from reading the book is that Deckard is married in the short story,
Oh, that's different. That's a big difference.
and he has a wife, and they live together in this kind of semi-domestic bliss, or domestic semi-bliss. And so, at least at the beginning of the movie. And so there's this kind of domestic, settled, arranged, or just kind of not arranged, but this domestic settled bliss, at least in a short period of time. And it's interesting that kind of to me because they don't have any kids, of course, but they do have a pet. And, this is a time when there are no domesticated animals because they were all killed in the catastrophic war which precedes this dystopia. And
Mhm.
so they have an artificial pet. And so they are, in some ways, at the beginning of the movie, this little um, nuclear family. Now, of course, the nuclear family gets upset by his job and his pursuit of the other replicants, which is not that's a term used for the movie. That's not part of the original. So it's kind of, and they have a religion that they follow, and it's just interesting. It's just a neat little bliss package, at least to start with.
Mhm.
Kind of a married life. It's not the big sweeping romantic idyllic love, but it's a version of love once you've gotten past the infatuation phase. And much of that is destroyed by artificial life forms and his pursuit of artificial life forms.
Well, Dick is such an interesting writer. I do want to go back and read that. It's really embarrassing to admit that I haven't, but there's no.
Not really. His stuff is not an easy read. His stuff is convoluted and complex and complicated, and it's kind of difficult to get through some of it. It's not as difficult as Dune is. That's where I have not been able to succeed. I can't read Dune because of the writing style.
I
It makes me want to throw the book as far away from me as I can.
Yeah, I skipped around a little in that myself, so I'm certainly spoken to others who say the same thing. But what are you going to do? It's like, who read all of Moby Dick either, right? No. One movie, and I that we also in the list of, well, you have to mention because we have to be careful, right? We could talk about this topic like so many others for hours, but I think there's a few must mention movies in there. And
Sure.
one of them is 2017's Best Picture winner, which of course I'm talking about The Shape of Water.
Yeah, that's a great example of this. Good
Mhm.
call.
There's a romance for you. There's a romance, actually. We had mentioned the Metamorphosis episode of Star Trek. That's one of the closest comparisons I can think of it, where you've got these, the interspecies romance here going on.
Sure.
But that's a unique movie, and it's shocking to me that it was as popular as it was and as well received as it was, and that it earned Del Toro a Best Director award as well as getting the Best Picture award itself. That just boggles my mind.
Yeah, science fiction won a best picture. How'd that happen? Oh,
Or they
wait.
label it fantasy, but it's just as much science fiction as it is fantasy. It's
Yes, that happened because it was a romance science fiction.
something people could see and relate to.
Yeah, so romance leads the way.
I don't know. Not everybody has is hunting.
Well, at least with best picture it did in this
Hmm.
case.
Yeah, well, it's a good movie. It's not quite it's all it's hyped up to be, but it's still obviously best picture. It's obviously worth seeing. I guess I'm more the movie head more than anything. I don't read. You actually read.
Well, not so much anymore. The internet has destroyed my attention span.
Uh, one movie I want to really call out for special attention though, because it's an obscure movie. It's a small movie. And I just stumbled on it a ways ago. It's from 2014 and it's called Spring. You ever heard of this one? I'd be
I have
surprised.
not. Hit me with it because I like the obscure ones.
Yeah, Spring is, and you're gonna look at me funny when I say this. Spring is Imagine Before Sunset,
Okay.
written by H.P. Lovecraft.
Wow.
And I'm not the first person to say combine Lovecraft with Before Sunset. I mean, I did come up with that on my own, but I've since then looked at other people talking about this movie, making the same sort of comparison. It's
Wow.
um, it's extraordinary. It's a lot like, I mean, the last half of the movie. The first half is really more plot driven, but then it falls into something that is very reminiscent of Before Sunset with this couple, where the man is traveling in Europe. He's an American taking himself to Italy, where he meets and ends up falling in love with this very mysterious woman. And I hate to give it all away, but let's just say she turns out to be kind of a weird tentacly monster. But it's
She's of
this
the Eldritch persuasion.
exactly. But it's a fantastic movie and it turns into a beautiful love story. It really, really does. And
Interesting.
it's another one I strongly recommend, but it's a little movie out there. And I checked it before I got on here. It's carrying like an 85% tomato meter rating, so I'm not the only person who liked it. Um,
Huh.
Definitely worth checking out. Again, it's called Spring.
I might have to do that. That one sounds good.
Hmm.
That
Yeah,
one sounds good.
no, you'll love it. So I didn't want to get through this without giving it a shout out.
Sure. Well, I'm going to mention some movies that I don't necessarily like, but which are clear examples of this. Passengers.
Passengers. Yeah, Passengers. I couldn't get past this sort of creepy premise
Oh, well, there's a lot of creepiness in science fiction love movies. Yeah,
because they're written by all these dudes who don't know how to relate to women in healthy ways.
yeah. I mean, their idea of relating to women is to tell them all about Bitcoin.
God.
But yeah, passengers. Here's the reason. There's only one reason to like passengers, and that is the guy who does the lighting for the movie really, 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 really loves Jennifer Lawrence because she is radiant in this movie.
You know, it's funny. I was about to say when you said there's one reason thing to like about this movie, I was going to say Jennifer Lawrence. I love Jennifer Lawrence.
Well, I mean, she's the kind of actress that even if it's a bad movie, she's going to elevate it.
I agree.
But even without that phenomenal capability, because there aren't a whole lot of actors who can do that, the camp the DP or the lighting guy or the combination of the two, they got together, at least apocryphally, and said, how do we make this gorgeous woman look even better? Because I mean, you can understand why Pratt falls madly in love with her, with the way she's lit and depicted in the movie. Just the
Mhm.
visual style alone is enough to sit through this pretty bad movie.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great example of it's a story where although you start out in this kind of creepy way where the guy is completely selfish and just is worried about his own ability to deal with the loneliness of space, so he wakes somebody up prematurely. They eventually do fall in love. Oh, that part of it's completely unrealistic. And live out a life together. But the movie just makes her look like $20 million. I mean, she is just like I said, the word is radiant. And she does her normal Tom Hanks style performance. And by Tom Hanks style performance, I mean she makes you think you could do this too, but there's no way in hell you can do it.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
So, and then we're going to stay on the Jennifer Lawrence train here, and we're going to talk about all the Hunger Games movies.
Yeah. Yeah. They deal with romance in a very interesting way with the sort of, I don't know if you can exactly call it a love triangle, but her two suitors, basically. Um, yeah, no, that's a good call.
It is, and it's actually kind of a niche romantic story in that it's love for survival. So every element of of Katniss's world deals with some level of survival. If you're not in the Hunger Games, you're starving to death because you were one of the rebellious provinces,
Hmm.
districts. And so this is love in the time of war, love in the time of survival, love in as a way to get through very difficult circumstances. And I think it's a strong contender in this particular category because of that.
Hmm.
There are other examples of love getting you through a dystopian time and other movies where love is what drives you through war. So I think this is a classic kind of element of those Mockingjay movies.
Hmm. Yeah, of course.
And the books too, but I haven't read those books.
No, me neither, because I don't read anything.
Well, I'm sure those books are fine pieces of young adult literature, and I'm not going to distinguish between young adult literature and regular literature because it's all literature to me. But
Oh, I hear wonderful things about the books. Everyone who's read them loves them for sure.
and so I just think I just think it's a great example of what I'm talking about,
Hmm.
where science fiction is the setting for romantic convention.
Of course, the one thing that all of these examples we've been talking about have in common, sort of blazingly obvious here, but I think it's time to call it out that we're talking about, science fiction just giving us straight relationship after straight relationship, just
Yeah,
the same as, Hollywood in general.
sure.
But also as the same as Hollywood in general, we're starting to see that to change too. And
Yeah, we
I think,
sure are.
and we're
We sure are.
definitely been seeing it in literature for a while, I think. But it's finally trickling out to the movies and TV. And again, I don't see how you can talk about the topic without going right back to Star Trek and talk about the relationships in Discovery.
Yeah, and they tried to do that in TOS, but the studio shut it down. Not
Yeah.
TOS, sorry, TNG, the Next
Oh,
Generation.
yeah. Well, the word was that Roddenberry was very open to it, and the studio wasn't interested. And then, of course, they danced a little bit with that episode, the Outcast, where Riker falls for a member of a an alien race that is non-gendered.
Yeah,
Um, that was It was clear what they were going for. It was very laudable. The problem is you could also flip that story around and make it into some sort of right-wing dystopia. So there's room for interpretation in the wrong direction that I
yeah,
think might be horrifying to the writers. But it was still progressive for its time, and they gave it a pretty good shot. But Discovery, they go all out. We've got of course, their relationship between Stamets and Culber, which
sure.
I gotta say, when they started the series, I thought they were both sort of stiff as hell, but they ended up finding a real chemistry, the two actors.
Yeah,
I think it took them a season, but then it was really there, and the two of them did just a great job. They were a terrific couple, one of the best couples we've seen in Star Trek, regardless of gender.
well, this is a good example where Star Trek follows its impulses. Its creative impulse ends up in the actual execution of the show.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's good. And I'm now thinking back to one of my favorite shows, but you can't really call it science fiction. It's more fantasy, and that's Buffy.
Hmm.
Buffy was pretty revolutionary because it normalized a same-sex relationship. It didn't announce it. It didn't, nobody came on TV with a commercial saying, oh, like they did with Roseanne and Ellen kissing or whatever it was
Yeah.
when Ellen DeGeneres' show. They just made it a part of the plot.
Boy, it's a shame that Joss Whedon turned out to be such an asshole.
Hey, speaking of that, have you read the Will Wheaton commentary on that about how to
No.
separate the art from the artist?
Oh, I have a thought on that too. Well, we had a whole episode about that once a while ago. But I always told my kid it's like there's a smell in the room. If you go in and you want to read a Lovecraft book, there's sort of a smell. You want to watch a Whedon thing, there's sort of a smell. So it's like Can you deal with the smell when you're watching the show or reading the book? If you can, great. More power to you. Have a great time.
And
Sometimes for some people, the smell might be bad enough it sends them out of the room, and different people are going to be different about it.
well, what I like about what Wheaton says is it's a response to a question from a fan about how to deal with the fact that somebody terrible created something that means so much to you.
Right.
In particular, this kid was trying to come out and he didn't have the courage to do it. And what he watched was a real comfort and relief to him when he was considering doing this. You ought to go read it. It's really profound. Wheaton does
Hmm.
a great job of explaining how to deal with this problem of dealing with something that somebody terrible created, but which has such meaning to you. And
Hmm.
it's pretty smart. It's pretty smart both in terms of just the general way he depicts it, but it's also pretty emotionally intelligent.
Hmm.
And I was really, really surprised that it was so brief but so accurate.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's great. I would encourage everybody go read, just Google Will Wheaton and how to, deal with. I don't know how your Google search would go, but yeah, Will Wheaton has this great response to how do you separate the artist from the art.
Hmm. Hmm. No, that's one of my favorite topics for
But
sure.
yeah, Buffy did what I call normalizing, what everybody else calls normalizing. It
Sure.
normalized a romantic relationship between two main characters in a way which was not showy or flashy or, which said, pick me, I'm the progressive program. It
Right.
just did it. It
Yeah.
just did it. It was a normal progression for both characters.
Hmm.
It showed the consequences of that particular kind of relationship to the people that, it dealt with Oz's anger
Hmm.
at her realizing who she really is. And it's about normalizing something that is really normal,
Yeah. It was
you know.
very, was not self-conscious about it. It wasn't self-congratulatory. It was just, it deserves a lot of cred for that, for sure.
These are the two characters, and here's how they got together, just like you
Hmm.
would do with any other set of straight characters in mainstream literature. And
Yeah.
so that was very well done. And it I don't one of the things that Will Wheaton says is that it wasn't, especially in TV, he says these things aren't done by one person. These things are all collaborative. And not everybody in that collaborative process is going to be bad or misbehave or, terrible human beings. And I guarantee you that whole arc was heavily influenced by the writers
Hmm.
in the writing room with that Whedon established.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Quite the writing room. Um,
Yeah.
One more, it's going to drive you crazy, but I have to cite Discovery one more time for the
Sure, sure.
relationship between Adira and Gray. We have our first that I can think of in sci-fi television or movies, non-binary character in a relationship with a trans character. Um, this one worked less for me simply because I didn't feel like the actors had a lot of chemistry.
Yeah.
I think they had a lot to carry on their shoulders to be sort of pioneers in that way. And in particular, the actor who played Gray, whose name I can't think of, and I feel really bad about that, but just never sold me. The chemistry just wasn't there. But kudos to everyone involved, the writers, the actors,
Yeah.
the whole crew. That one thing about that whole acting team, I saw them at Comic-Con, and there was clearly a lot of camaraderie among that team about what they were doing, the stories they were telling, and how they were telling them, and so it was an amazing thing for them to take that step, and got them a lot of grief from the bro set, of course, but
Yeah, that's something definitely we need to explore is the whole bro mentality in science fiction and fantasy. It's got to go.
yeah.
It
Well, we were
it
talking
never
about
will,
having an
but
episode
it's
about right wing sci-fi too, so maybe
yeah.
it's a good
It's
place.
got to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to go back to Karl Popper's paradox of intolerance. Ironically, the only thing you can't tolerate is intolerance.
Ah,
So we'll talk about that more when we talk about right-wing science fiction.
yep, yep, that's coming. It's coming. Well, all right. Well, what do you think? We could keep talking for a while, but maybe we've covered a lot of ground here.
Well, I'm going to hit you with something here that shockingly you've left out, and then we'll
Uh-oh.
finish up.
Uh-oh.
X-Men.
Oh, when you said shockingly I've left that, I thought you were going to say Star Wars.
No, the comics.
But X-Men.
You've left out
Sure.
the whole range of X-Men comics, and there are a number of relationships, a number of romantic circumstances, uh, all the way through those comics. And I'm barely familiar with the comics, but yeah, I
I
mean,
can help you out with that.
there you go.
No, the only comics reference I made was actually comic strip was Flash Gordon. So
Yeah.
I'm playing against form here. But no, the X-Men as metaphor is of course very well established, and the relationships then in it is also, or well, not we're not talking the metaphor though. I'm gonna cancel that out. Of course, the X-Men as metaphor is a big one, but the actual relationships in X-Men were it depends on relationships and sort of romance, not just between, Cyclops and Phoenix, but all kinds of convoluted relationships. They
Yeah.
certainly played with with gender. They've played with different types of sexuality. They have to do it sometimes in quiet and subtle ways, but sometimes they get away with a surprising amount.
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah. So I was just kind of shocked. I'm like, hey, he's not bringing up comics here. How's that happening?
Yeah, especially when we get to strange free love Krakoan society or whatever the hell did Wolverine and Cyclops and Jean Grey were doing. I don't know. I got to go back and read those issues. But but yeah. All right.
And we didn't even touch on, lots of different aspects of love. We didn't touch on the love of humanity. There are many different kinds of love. We stuck primarily with romantic love, but there's all kinds of other relationships that deal with love that, because science fiction reflects the greater society it's involved with, or criticizes the greater society that it's part of,
Mhm.
that we didn't touch on. But we can always do that in other episodes.
That's right.
Familial love, brotherly love, the love between friends.
Sure. Plenty of love to go around. Whole lot of love. Well, thanks everybody for listening. This is always was a lot of fun. And we'll see you in a couple weeks with something hopefully as much fun, hopefully more fun even. The sky's the limit of fun in this show. So we'll catch you next time. Bye, y'all.
Yep. Bye. Thanks.
Our theme music is by Christopher Piatek.